Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking today, as you can see on the screen, about UX matters, and yes, it even matters to you. But before diving into that, I'm going to introduce myself. I am a VP of Consulting here at Improving. You can see the splat behind me and splat in my shirt. Yes, it's everywhere. But a couple little things about me. I am a developer, have been a developer for an entire career. So no, I'm not a UX designer per se, but I thoroughly believe in the value of it, which is why I'm here today. I'm a Christian, a improver, and a lifelong learner. If you want to reach out to me, I do love connecting with anybody who likes to either continue conversation or just get to know me. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can pretty much Google me and you'll find me. It's fine. I can give you my email if you'd like. All right, so that's me. And first and foremost, who is this talk for? Because the title tends to indicate, it's for UX designers, for UI developers, or people who care about designing screens. And the answer to that is no. This talk is relevant to anybody who is part of a team that's building a product that other people are going to use. Because user experience applies to the things we use on a day-to-day basis, including software, and definitely not limited to software. But I feel like when I talk about UX, it tends to exclude groups. I want to make sure, yes, this talk is very relevant for you if you're part of one of those teams or you manage one of those teams. Now, the next thing I want to get kind of out of the way before diving into this is, what is UX? When you think about UX, there tends to be this idea that it is making everything pretty. It is making sure the pixel is just the right buffer width from the other button or whatever that might be. But actually, a lot of that is in UI. That is the visual design, the colors, all of those things. User experience is just that, is the experience, it's the interaction, it is wireframing prototypes, it is user research, and a whole lot of other things that are very important and are likely go into whether or not your product is going to be successful or not. And that's why at the very beginning, that is why it matters. But I want to make sure to separate those two concepts, because no, I'm not going to be talking about how to put together a pretty screen or create icons or anything like that. I am going to be talking about experience this entire time. So to do that, I am going to leverage some real world experiences. But first, let's talk about doors. Did you know that when you come to a door, you automatically know what to do with that door when it comes to push versus pull? Now, let's say you have these two sets of doors. Now, without ever being trained, you know when you go approach the doors on the left, you're supposed to push those doors. And the doors on the right, you're supposed to pull those doors. Now, why do you know that? It has to do with the position of the handle. And somewhere in our training, and I don't know really where this came from, we got the understanding that this low push was to push and this one is to pull. Now, how many times will we run into a door like this? It is a horizontal handle with a sign saying pull. And it doesn't matter what that sign says, you're still going to try to push that door. Suddenly, you feel like this, right? All of a sudden, I need to be submitted to the School of the Gifted because I can't figure out how to push or pull a door or read a sign that is only 4 letters long. Now, that is very, very common. But the interesting thing about that is, if you look at the product design in the world, the more a user feels like that, one of two things is going to happen. First of all, the user is not going to enjoy their experience with their product. And so if it's an option, they're going to stop using it. The second one is they're going to recognize the person that created that product didn't consider that experience, and they're going to not like the person that built it. So it's either going to be your product or you that take the hit for a poor design. So my hope here is that this can help take some steps in the direction that help create better designs and help create happier users that ultimately make you more successful in your career. So talk about some real world examples, and let's have some fun with this because I had a ton of fun building this slideshow. But to do this, we're going to talk about Goldilocks and the 3 bears. Now, why in the world is because there's lots of ways to get it wrong and very few ways to get it right. And so I wanted to categorize them just a little bit. So we're going to start with the Papa Bear bed, where it was way too hard. And what does that mean? It means things that are you just obviously got the user experience of that just a little bit wrong. So for example, if you haven't seen this before, it is a live site that it's lingscars.com. And the funny thing about this site actually is that it was so bad at the experience that it actually created a reputation for it and created clicks into their site. So it ended up being a positive for them in the long run, but I don't know if that was the intent at the beginning. But ultimately, it's a good example. You go there, there's sound that's playing, the stuff is moving, as you can see, it's just an overload of color, and the entire site is built that way. You can go ahead and go to that site and Google that. It's a lot of fun to just go and get a little laugh from that. But what other design fails? And design fails are some of my fun, some of the things I really enjoy finding. You build this thing, it's obvious to me that two different people probably put this together and didn't consider the design of the other. So if you think about product design, you think about building either it's a physical item or a software project, you're probably interacting with some other thing that somebody else built. And that interaction ends up mattering a lot too in its user experience as well. Similarly here with some chairs that, they help you stare at a wall. Awesome design, right? It's gonna really help people out. Or this, where the site is actually asking to redirect to the mobile site, and that's actually the question it's asking, but then the blue text underneath it just confuses you. And so you look at the yes and you're like, wait, what am I actually saying yes to? And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, am I going to the desktop site and then going to the desktop site? I don't really understand. And so it's just a kind of a funny little fail. Or things that have all of the best design until you're halfway through using it and all of a sudden you accidentally have a pencil telling kids to do drugs. Don't do that. These chairs. Now, if you've ever been in school and you had to sit on these chairs, I'm sure there are people in this world that have short hair and never experienced the utter pain of when your hair gets caught in little buttons on the back of the chair and you go to stand up and suddenly use 5 hairs every time you sit down. It was absolutely awful. Not that those chairs were comfortable to begin with, but apparently they were good for schools and just caught all of the girls' hairs in the chairs. All right, so that's Papa Bear. That's like the category. Let's all agree that that's not great. Like let's do a little bit better. But then there's Mama Bear bed. Maybe a little bit too soft, maybe a little too clever. And that's what I'm going to talk about here. Now, a lot of these are going to be like, did you knows kind of designs. Like, did you know that a screwdriver has that shape on it so that you can put a wrench on it so you can screw and unscrew things in awkward places? I didn't, not until like 3 days ago. Did you know that on the childproof caps, the top has the ridging on it so you can turn it over if you don't need the childproof aspect of the cap? I wish I knew this so long ago. It would have saved so many tears. Did you know that pans have the holes there to hold your utensils so that they're not putting, in my case, oil or whatever it is on your countertop, or having to buy those little like spoon holders that you have to clean every once in a while or every time that you use it? Did you know that the little arrow next to the gas sign right there is to indicate which side of the car the gas tank is on? So that when you go to the gas station, you don't have to like accidentally on the wrong side, embarrassingly get back in your car, drive to the other side, and then be able to fill up your tank, or do that thing where you try to get the hose to fit all the way to the other side of your car. Yeah, that thing. Glorious invention that not enough people know about in this world. Did you know that the little tabs on the Coke cans have a hole in them so you can put a straw in it, and the straw doesn't, you know how it like sits in there and it floats out? It doesn't do that anymore. It's great. Did you know that on the also infamous ketchup bottles that the number 57 on the bottle is meant to be the place that you tap it or squeeze it so you can actually get ketchup out of the bottle? Who knew? Who knew? I discovered this one very recently. It was mind blown. Now, these designs are the example that I'm using here because they're clever. They actually solve the problem that we're looking for, but so many people don't know they exist. And the last thing I want to happen is you spend effort and energy and time and money creating a design for the need, and it's never used for its intended purpose, right? So let's talk about the bed that is just right. Now, some of these are going to be controversial, so I'm going to preface this as my opinion. You are free to disagree with me, but I believe some of these designs kind of hit the nail right on the head. These, if you don't know what these are, I got to introduce to these from a friend of mine. They are magnetic charging cables where you can put the little piece inside of your phone with your AirPods, your phone, tablet, other devices, whatever, Kindle, whatever device it might be. And all you have to do is have one cable that sits somewhere and you can plug any device into it. Now, there are those like it's really common these days to have those little pads that you can charge things on without having a cord, and those are great. Not all your devices do that, so this really works well for all the other devices. For your mice, I have a Remarkable that I use it for a whole bunch of different things. Absolutely awesome. And they include data processing and quick charging and all of that. Love these devices. And I think it hits that like, oh, well, I have to have a cord for this and a cord for this, a cord for this. And you have to have like 17 of them and a cord management system and all of this stuff just to be able to charge your devices. And that's why I put this one here. Caution floor signs. I love these because it clearly indicates to us that this is slippery, but it's also not an eyesore. It's kind of, you look at it and you're like, yeah, no, I completely recognize a banana is something you slip on because cartoons taught us that as a kid. Or this, it's a coat hanger / purse hanger where if you don't need it, it collapses. I don't know how many times I've been like, oh man, I could really like to have something like right by my front door, but then I don't always want something right by my front door. A genius solution to that is something that does that. If you guys have ever Googled like tiny homes, they have all kinds of these types of solutions where things can collapse away or whatnot. And I find them absolutely fascinating. This one I really like. And there isn't in a lot of places, but when I see it, I'm like, this person really thought about the use case of when the sign is going to be needed. Because when there is a fire and there is smoke in a building, you're going to be on the floor to make sure you don't get smoke inhalation. And while you're on the floor, you're not going to be able to read a sign that is 6-7 feet up in the air. But you can read one that is right there on the floorboard with you. So this one is one of those that they really thought who was using this system or this sign and when are they going to really need it. So I love this one so much. We got this pen cap. This pen cap is a hole. Anybody know why by chance? Now, that's obviously a rhetorical question because you can't answer that, but the actual purpose for it is because the pen creators figured out that people chew on them. And regardless of how many times they told people don't chew on these pen caps, people still did. And so they added the hole so that when you inevitably do swallow the cap, you won't choke on it, air can still get through. Again, another one of those, like, we have to recognize who's using this thing, and even if they're not using for the purpose that it's built for. And a shower that has an actual temperature gauge on it. I constantly struggle with showers, whether it is the little pull down thing at the bottom of the faucet that gets the shower to thing, or whether it's like you turn it on and turn the temperature at the same time, so you're not sure, like, can I get more pressure without making it scalding hot, or vice versa. I absolutely love clearly designed showers that tell you what to do, so you're not sitting there like naked in the shower like, what am I at? Well, that's cold. Let's not do that, right? So all of that is great and everything, but let's talk about how, right? If we don't want to have designs that are really bad, of course, if we don't want to do the clever designs, we have to do this middle area. How do we even get there? Well, ultimately, the person that is using your system wants primarily one thing. They don't want to think. It's hard. We do it all the time. We have to think all day. At the end of the day, let's just stop having to think about the things we're trying to do and distracting us from the actual objective we're trying to get through. Well, luckily enough, there's a book for this. The book is called, conveniently, Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug, which is where my journey started in UX, where my perspective actually changed in UX. Now that's actually where the talk of this talk came from, because when I read this book, I started looking around at the things that I use on a daily basis. And every time that something like just didn't fit the need, I was like, man, UX matters. And I started using that phrase to the point that like my boss and several of the people around the office were like, UX matters. And it was this fun little game that we ended up playing, but it really opened my eyes to understand and appreciate the need for it. Understanding that there is absolutely the extreme side of it where you can take that way too far and create projects that are much more than they need to be. But let's talk about what do we talk about in UX Matters. So first and foremost, there are 3 facts of life, right? First of all, and this is more pointed straight towards software and less about all of the other products in the world. The first point is we don't read pages, we scan them. Like let's be honest, you don't actually, when you see the little facts thing on the right, you saw red facts and ignored like 90% of the words around it. That is a human thing. We're usually on a mission. If I'm going to a web page and let's say I'm looking for jobs on a career page, I'm going to be looking for jobs, right? I'm not going to be looking for, all of the jargon and other stuff they have on the page. So I'm going to completely miss it. So if it's hard for me to find the thing that I'm looking for, I'm going to get frustrated with the page. And we really don't need to read everything, right? So again, like if I'm going somewhere, I generally have a purpose. Like sometimes you're just scanning to browse, but even then, not everything's going to interest me, and I don't really need to read it all to get a good understanding of what I'm trying to do. And lastly, we're good at it. We spend our lives skimming stuff. We learn how to skim as a child. Like I remember being a kid and be like, read the first paragraph and last paragraph, and if you can't figure it out, maybe one or two other sentences. And you learn to pay attention to the things that are brought to your attention. So when everything is shouting, you're just like, oh, I'm a little overwhelmed. We don't make optimal choices, we satisfy. So this is, again, just a fact of life. We're usually in a hurry. I can't think of a time that I've been on my phone and scrolling through a web page or scrolling through an app and being like, yeah, sure, you can take 10 seconds to load. I'll wait. I'm happy waiting. This is good. So in that similar ilk, if everything is immediate, 1 to 3 second response times, those types of things, I'm probably not spending 10 seconds reading the page either. And so keep that in mind when you're building the screens. And there's not much of a penalty for guessing wrong. Systems are built so that people can't make the wrong decisions very often. And so you click on something, you get the wrong spot. Okay, I'll go back. The irony of that is when you can go wrong, like when the system lets you go very, very wrong, people are like, oh, that's really bad. Like they really need to fix that system. And then weighing options may not improve our chances. We're like, okay, well, I mean, that button sounds like it might be right, and that button sounds like it might be right. If I sit here and think about it for 10 seconds, that's going to actually take me longer than just clicking on the first one, figuring out I was wrong, coming back and clicking on the second one. And guessing is more fun. We are curious creatures. We like to explore. We like to figure out the world around us. And so when it comes to something, especially if it piques our interest, we're going to be like, yeah, I'm going to guess over here. I'm like, ooh, look where I ended up. And I found this video or I did that, right? And then lastly, last fact of life, we don't figure out how things work. We muddle through. So I remember software design. I guess this was like probably the late 90s, where like the whole thing was how-to pages, right? Every single application had that section where it was like, here is like how to use this website. And then suddenly, I think software developers or designers or somebody figured out that nobody actually reads that. And so they're spending a whole lot of time just designing these pages that nobody ever read, or if they did, they were already very frustrated. And so we eventually got to a point that we're like, okay, well, let's figure out a way how to not need that. And that is where this whole UX idea pretty much came from, of let's create a system that is intuitive and somebody can figure out without having to read paragraphs to figure out, or having to memorize how to do that. Now, there are systems in this world that are like utterly complex. You're talking massive data science algorithms that, in order for the user to understand what's supposed to do on the screen, they need to have some understanding of how those numbers are coming about, where you have to give more information. But then it's about when and where do you put that information on the screen, right? But we also muddle through because it's not important to us. Like the priorities in my life generally don't include, let me get a full documented understanding of this application. It just doesn't, and it won't. And I'm sure the same is true for a lot of us. And then finally, if we find something that works, we stick to it. Now, to show that one specifically, I am going to play a small video that you may or may not have already seen.
This is a square. Can you guess which spot that goes in?
The square.
That's right. It goes in the square hole.
Yes. Okay.
And how about this rectangle? That one
Also the square.
that goes in there too.
Yeah.
Up next, we've got this thin rectangle.
The thin
Can
rectangle.
you guess where that goes?
The thin rectangle.
That's right. It goes in the square hole. And up next, a cylinder.
The circle.
I think that goes in
The circle.
the square hole. Now, we've also got this semicircle right here. Do you see a slot that would fit
The semicircle.
semicircle?
The semicircle.
That's right. It's the square hole. Okay. Up next, the triangle. We know what hole that goes
The
into,
triangle.
right?
Triangle.
That's right. The square hole. And up next, we have the arch.
The arch. The
And
arch.
you guessed it.
The arch.
It goes in the square
Oh,
hole.
God.
So I don't know if you've seen that video before or not, But it really does show what it's like to be a user. When you didn't design the system, what's obvious to the designer is not obvious to the user. So they're going to find something that works, and as long as that keeps working, they will keep using that. And the hard part about that is if you design a system that has 5 options, there might be 100 users that picks option 5 and 500 that use option 2 and another 100 that use option 1, and you're like, well, how do I know which one to pick? And that is what user testing is super valuable for. So then if you never have anybody use the other 2 options, you can eliminate those 2 at the very minimum, and then maybe eliminate one other and train a subset of your users to learn another option by default. But that is, if you think about that video as you're building whatever that thing is, keep that in mind, because they will overuse and misuse things if they think it fits their purpose. All right. Now we're going to cover a couple tips for a good experience. Now these are things to keep in mind. I don't care if you're a backend developer or UI developer, or you're a product developer, anything like that. You're part of the team, and it is the team's responsibility to create a good experience. And so things like taking advantage of conventions, colors, shapes, styles, fonts, they matter a ton. If you have a commonality of a button being blue, make all your buttons blue. If your button needs to be not a button, but like a link, okay, make it a text, but still make it blue. Blue automatically, the user learns that color means clickable. But then that means you should not use that exact shade of blue for something that is not clickable. You're going to frustrate your users. Taking advantage of, create effective visual hierarchies. We're talking headers being a certain size. If this is the important sentence I want you to read, I'm going to make it look important to you. These are the details that you only need when you need it. I'm going to show you that that's the only time that you're going to need that information. Breaking pages into clearly defined areas are going to be areas that that are logically congruent, right? So this is going to be like if you're shopping, this is going to be I'm checking out, I'm trying to pay for something, this is my addresses, making sure that those sections are clearly defined so that while they're in a certain section, they can ignore the rest of them and that what their objective is at that time is clearly informed. Make it obvious what's clickable. Again, that's back to that blue thing I was just saying. Use the color, use the standard that exists out there in the world. We know what hyperlinks look like. We know what buttons look like. We understand that a red button probably means delete or something dangerous. We know that a yellow button means, warning, right, in general. So use those standards. Leverage what experiences out there in the world. Something I do really often when I'm thinking about how a screen should come together is I'll be like, well, what other applications do something similar? And I'll use like airline pages or Amazon or you name it out there in the world to be like, well, this is something users are already familiar with, and it won't create a learning curve for them to learn how to use it in my system. Eliminate distractions. Now, think about how, like, if you're going and reading a blog page, you'll have on the right those ads, and we have somehow learned to just completely ignore the fact that those ads exist. Like, we don't even see that side panel anymore. And so to do that, we need to put all of the content in somewhere where you give people the ability to ignore everything else, and that's similar with creating those the defined areas, right? So that you can tell you like, hey, this is all that you need, because as a person developing the screen, you have to recognize they are going to miss that. And so especially if you're saying like, okay, well, I have a form that I need you to fill out, but I'm with the button outside of that section, you're going to find a user that gets done with the form and they're just like sitting there looking like, where's the button? Because they don't even see that location on the screen. And format content to support scanning. Now, this image on the right is just a pretty design that I pulled off the web, but it gives you a basic idea of the color schemes that they went for, what a color a button is. They picked purple in this example, and I can scan that pretty quickly, and I can identify what are the important elements on this page, which requires you as a team to know what the user's perspective of what is important, and that can be very challenging. But again, it's really is next to impossible to have a good user experience without talking to your users, right? And finally, earning some goodwill. And I'm going to warn you guys, I am getting close to the ends of my slides. So if you have any questions that are popping up, go ahead and put them in the chat now. There's about a 20-second delay from when I'm streaming to when you guys are actually seeing this video. So if you start entering those now, we can get some questions at the end. So earning some goodwill, know the main obvious things people want to do and make it obvious, right? Main things that people want to do. This is really kind of beating a dead horse a little bit right now, but if somebody's coming to the page to buy something, make buying something obvious. Make that the first thing you want to do. I was at a page recently where I was looking for something and I literally could not find how to, I was like, I know for sure this exists as a page on their website and I could not find it in any logical way. And that's the thing, is you kind of want to guide them to, hey, it might be over here. I am the category of the stuff that you're not finding so far. Tell me what I want to know. One of the things that I've really appreciated some of the more modern designs is the commonly asked questions. I feel have gotten a lot better these days. I was reviewing a website recently where the commonly asked questions, I had 3 in my head and they answered 2 out of the 3, just like that. It's like, awesome. They understand what perspective I'm coming for to ask it. I ended up asking the question, and the reason that question wasn't on there is because they're like, wow, we don't get that question a lot. So they did their user research and they got the questions and they got the answers to them, which shows the intent and the exercise of what we're talking about here. Save me steps wherever you can. Users really hate it when it takes multiple clicks to do something. We have a time reporting system where it takes 2 clicks to actually submit your time. The number of people that miss that on a regular basis is actually kind of amusing. But the idea is I'm going to remember the minimum amount of stuff that I need to remember about the system. So if I don't have to have that step, don't give me that step. I find that the things that create more steps more often than not are going to be stuff like approval processes. And sometimes they're unavoidable, but if you can, please eliminate that step. And this has kind of been what I've been talking about the whole time. Put effort into it. Get to know your users, care about it. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to be this monumental amount of effort to do it. It's a little bit. It's the paying just a little bit more attention to be like, hey, it takes almost no time to put the buttons constantly on the right than it does as long as we're thinking about it in the time. Once you get done with the system, they're like, yeah, some of the buttons are on the right, some buttons are wrong on the left, something's on the top, some on the bottom. And at the end of the day, you're like, oh, well, it takes a long time to go fix that. You don't want to end up there. You want to start in a way where you can build it so that you don't have to go redo it to create a good experience. We already talked about knowing questions I'm like to have and answering them. Again, one of the hard parts of that is going to be complex systems where you're talking about complex calculations and processes that are just, unless you know the domain, unless you know the business, it's just not going to make sense. So oftentimes that needs to be paired with training or documentation that lives probably outside of your application or in tangent with your application. And provide me with creature comforts like printer-friendly pages. If you're working in a data-heavy application, that's probably going to be exporting to Excel. I generally highly recommend that you don't ever try to recreate Excel in the web because there's always going to be features in Excel that they're going to want that you haven't done yet. Instead, give people the option to put it in the format that they want to or in the tools that they want to use that are much more powerful than you have the time to build. Make it easy to recover from errors. This one's actually really important because if I get into an error on a screen and then all of a sudden I'm stuck out of the water and I can't do anything about it, I'm much less likely to reuse the system. Now, there are systems in the world like internal business systems that you have to use, but then you end up finding that they'll create side systems, like whether it's Excel or whether it's SharePoint or whatever else, to do most of their job and only interact with the system when you have to, and suddenly a lot of your work has gone to waste. And then when in doubt, apologize. This one is one of my favorites when you get those little error messages that pop up and be like, hey, I'm sorry, something went wrong. We don't know what it did. Here's how to get out of this. Just the simple aspect of apologizing or recognizing that this is frustrating the user de-escalates it for the user. And it seems silly and it could seem naive almost, but it is actually very powerful. There was a project I was on one time that was it was called the button that we actually created. We created, instead of saying okay, it said forgive us, and the user started calling it the forgive us pop-up. instead of the error modal. They're like, oh, we didn't get an error, we got a forgive us pop-up. And it changed the entire tone of talking about errors, and it worked really well. But why are we talking about goodwill, right? Why does goodwill matter? Because back at the very beginning, I was talking about users getting to a point where they're frustrated with the system, or they're frustrated with you as the builder of the system, not considering how they were going to use the system, right? Goodwill is the thing that counters that. It is the thing that'll say, no, like they care about this. They've put in the effort, even if it's not perfect, even if it is mama bear or even papa bear. Sometimes you show that you care, you show just enough. That'll create leeway, and that'll create kind of a relationship with your users. And so the way I like to think of it now, it's almost like you're creating trust with your users through your screens. Is the user going to trust you, trust the results, trust what's happening on the screen based on what they get? Examples of this are going to be back to calculations on the screen. Do they know what data is going into that calculation? Is there an easy way to give them that information? Do you know where the data is coming from? This is going to be really important if you're working with engineers who are like, I need to know that this is the right data and that I can trust this. Or financial applications where it's like, I need to be able to dig into this data and understand what's happening here. And that gets very, very important. And so again, things you never, like, I don't think there is a perfect in this world, but the goodwill aspect and building that trust with the users through UX is what's going to be super powerful in making your systems that much more successful. Now, I ran through that a little faster than I expected, but are there any questions?
I don't have any questions at the moment. We can give people a minute or two longer to type in something.
Give it another 20 seconds or so. Again, if
While
you
we're
guys
waiting on questions, I can post a link to where the recording of this video is going to be, and all the other improving National Lunch and Learns are on our YouTube channel.
and I'm going to reiterate, if you get to a point where you're like, hey, I disagreed with something you said there, or hey, I understand in principle, but I understand how it applies here, or you just want to talk, whether it's about this or whether it's about my experiences or your experiences, please do reach out. RobynFuentes.com, and it's Robyn with a Y. You can find me, and you can find my LinkedIn, you can find my email, all that, and reach out to me.
Got one question here.
Awesome.
Have you seen Material 3, and what are your thoughts on it if you have?
I have seen Material 3. With all these frameworks, the frameworks themselves, I've really not had much of a problem with it. I am a fan of Material over Bootstrap in general in terms of usability and just making stuff a little bit more obvious as to how you're supposed to interact with those components. But in terms of UX, I don't know if this is answering your question directly. The component itself matters a lot less than how you're using it. So I don't have a huge opinion on Material 3. I've looked at it a little bit, but from what I've seen, there's nothing groundbreaking in it. Any other questions come in?
Not seeing any more.
That's fine. We can end a little bit early, give some people some time back. I kind of like short and sweet. So if you guys, again, reach out to me if you have any questions. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great Christmas and a great holiday season.